All right, well, hi everyone. Thank you all for
Hi.
joining us. My name is Chris Grosso, and I'm author of Indie Spiritualist. And to my,
I'm Adam, and I'm a co-author of Occupy Spirituality.
um, this is actually the first time Adam and I have done a dialogue together, so I'm really excited to be here with us. Adam came in from New York City today to be here with us. I came in from about 3 streets over. So, thanks, Adam, for making the drive.
Thank you.
So originally, this is the third annual spirituality fair that the sanctuary's done, and I've been honored to be a part of it each year. And I'd asked Adam if he wanted to come and do his own workshop, and he was into it. And he's like, "Why don't we just do a dialogue?" And I'm like, "All right, yeah, that's cool. What do you want dialogue about?" And we've been kind of asking each other that question right up until about 2 minutes ago. And so we are just going to tell you a little bit about ourselves and our experience with our spiritual journeys. And then we're going to kind of organically let the conversation take us where it will. We will talk for about 45 minutes, roughly, and then we will do like a 15-minute Q&A at the end for any questions, comments, concerns, whatever you guys want to share is cool with us. So I would love to ask Adam, if you don't mind starting out. I've heard your story, and I absolutely love it. Adam's from Poland, and he does a lot of tremendous work. I know he only mentioned he co-authored Occupy Spirituality, but he co-authored it with Matthew Fox, who is an amazing theologian. He is an old school spiritual rebel, a very amazing man. And Adam's done great work with Andrew Harvey, and just a lot of really important spiritual teachers. So I'd love if you could share a little about your stuff.
So it was a wonderful experience to work on the book with Matthew. He's been a mentor of mine for, I think, over a decade. And he's one of those real spiritual rebels. He was a Catholic priest and at some point was kicked out of the Catholic Church because he was too radical. Essentially, he had this idea that, he saw that young people are not going to church anymore. So he said, well, but they're going to raves. Why don't we do a rave mass? Why don't we bring raves into our churches? And he started doing that, and obviously Cardinal Ratzinger got pretty pissed about that. And eventually they silenced him for a year and then kicked him out. And now he's an Episcopal priest. He said that he received a religious asylum from the Episcopal Church. And actually this weekend, today, they're doing a rave mass at the Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, which is a big Episcopal cathedral. A little bit just briefly about kind of what brings me here and on this journey. I am originally from Poland. I grew up during the communist regime. I was born in 1975, so I was really growing up during the Solidarity movement, where, it wasn't a very good experience to be in Poland at that time. The system was extremely oppressive, and we were essentially trying to do something about it, young people as well as our parents. And so early on in my life, I knew that, just looking around me, that I had two choices. One was to become an activist, or another one to essentially just drink myself to death, because those are the only two choices, that people really had. And early on in my life, and that really brought me into spirituality, I was kind of really influenced by two activist priests who both of them were killed by the regime. One of them was my parish priest. The other one was Father Jerzy Popiełuszko. The Vatican is trying to make him into a saint now, which is kind of surprising, but hey. He was often called Gandhi of Poland because he stood for nonviolence and etc. And so early on in my life, I realized that, to say yes to God means to say no to everything that violates God's love and justice in the world. And I learned that from those guys. And I also learned that if you do that, there's a price that you have to pay. And both of those guys were killed, and one of them was really tortured, and a lot of it was then televised. And you know, that kind of led me to many different places, including to India, to a monastery in the Himalayas, and then working with homeless kids. And today I work with homeless kids. But you know, that's kind of a long story. But you know, maybe we can come back to it at some point, or you can just read the book. I didn't bring any copies, really. But Chris, what about you? I mean, what brings you here, and what motivated you to write that wonderful book of yours?
Thank you, sir. Well, that's a really tough story to follow because I don't know. I'm not from Poland. I didn't visit India. I was born in Maine, and I grew up in Milford and East Haddam, and here we are.
I mean, Poland, they just sound cool, but
I know, but you have that to work with. So I mean, the long short of my story is that what really drew me to the spiritual path was I'm in recovery. So it was years of active addiction that brought me to numerous rock bottoms. The most recent of which was about 3 years ago, I woke up in a jail cell from a blackout drunk, and all the times prior to that, I'd been either waking up in a jail cell or in a detox or a rehab, there was always a bit of a flame of hope I could still feel burning down there. But this time, it felt like the flame was completely extinguished. I was ready to die. I'd been ready to die at other times in my life, but this was a real yearning for death, like a welcoming, like, please take me because I'm over this. But that was really the catalyst that I think kind of shattered my heart armor. And I went to treatment in New Jersey for a few months, and it was actually while I was in treatment that one of the clinicians gave me a book called Finding Freedom by a death row inmate in San Quentin prison named Jarvis J. Masters. And I had heard of Jarvis because there's an amazing Buddhist nun, Pema Chodron, who writes and talks often about Jarvis in her books and lectures, and she actually wrote the foreword for his second book. But I had not read his material. And so the clinician brought it in, and I started to read it, and it just, it ignited that flame that I thought had gone out in me. You know, here's this man living on death row in San Quentin, the darkest, most desolate place you can imagine. And amongst that, he finds not only, the will to continue living, but to take his bodhisattva vows and to practice nonviolence, in death row. It's so really looking at that and comparing it to where my life was at, it was just a real wake-up call for me. Wow, you really don't have it so bad at all. You're in comparison, a relatively cushy rehab, which wasn't cushy, but, compared to death row, it really was. So, I ended up coming home, and I'd been doing a website prior to the relapse called Indie Spirituals, where I interview spiritual teachers and musicians and actors and all these things. I wanted to make a place where people can come together and explore different ideas. And one thing led to another. I started writing for other websites, and then I just started meeting the right people, and a book came out of it. I mean, there's more to it, but in the to respect time, I ended up writing this book, which has been a very humbling experience for me, because I write very raw and vulnerably, and I go into much more detail than I just did about my experience. And to receive emails and messages from people literally all over the world that have read this book and found hope through that book, like I found in Jarvis's book, easily the most meaningful thing that's ever happened to me in my life, that I can be of service in that way to people. I love being in service however I can, talking here, talking in rehabs or detoxes or festivals, whatever it may be. But to get those letters from people struggling, and not just with addiction, but I mean, we're all human beings. I had interviewed a mutual friend, Father Thomas Keating, who is a brilliant Trappist monk, and while I was interviewing him, I said, I'm in recovery from addiction, and he's in his 80s, I think, or so.
Yeah, like almost 90.
90. So he laughs, this like 80-year-old nice man laughing. He's like, well, I'm in recovery too, but I'm in recovery from the human condition. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. You know, it's like the Buddha teaches in his First Noble Truth that if you've taken a human birth, it's inevitable that we will experience suffering. But as the Buddha also goes on to teach that the amount of suffering that we experience is much more in our control than many of us actually realize. Um, so I wrote the book, and it's been a very surreal, humbling experience, as I said, and here we are today at the lovely sanctuary in East Haddam, full circle.
And it's a beautiful book. I mean, and written from a very vulnerable and deep place. If you guys haven't read it, please do.
Well, thanks, and let's come right back to you then, Adam. Occupy Spirituality is a very important book. First of all, what's beautiful about this book is Matthew Fox already mentioned. He's in his 70s.
Yeah.
So you have Matthew in his 70s, and then you have Adam who's in his 30s, and you have these two different generations that are coming together and talking about very relevant, not just spiritual aspects, but social aspects and sacred activism, as you guys call it. Mm-hmm. So I'd love for you if you could share a little about that.
So, I've been working with young people for the last 15 years. I originally started working with young people in India. I went to India to spend time at a monastery, at a Hindu Christian monastery. And on my way there, I met a homeless girl who's, I think, 13, just skin and bones. And, it just really shattered me into pieces. And I knew this old friend of mine who was this European guy from Amsterdam who was a heroin addict for 17 years and was this kind of an artist guru in Amsterdam in 70s. He would dress in this kind of wild costumes, make clothes out of like small mirrors, and then eventually, through his art and addiction, I mean, he realized, well, most of my friends died, and so. He moved into a basement and someone, because his gallery burned, and someone would visit him once a week, and together they would read the Bible, and then he had an experience of Jesus, and after that he went to India, so a dying person on the street, a person who was addicted to heroin, and he just started picking up those people from the streets of Delhi, and it evolved into this kind of a semi-monastic community in the slums. So when I met that girl, I got in touch with my friend because I felt like, maybe this is the monastery I'm supposed to be in. And it was one of those places where, like 60% of the people there were dying of AIDS. I mean, they would find people with maggots in their bodies. I mean, my first experience on the first day was, we found someone, that they like washed him, took off, like he had something, like his foot was wrapped into something. And like when they took off the material, part of his foot just fell off, like onto the floor. And they said, wow, even the maggots are already dead. So it was this kind of a crazy place, but at the same time, probably the most holy place I've ever experienced, And so kind of things just... through that experience, eventually I got sick in India, but I came to the United States and started working on the streets of different cities and eventually co-founded the Reciprocity Foundation, which is an organization for homeless kids in New York City. Kids who are doing sex work, who are on the streets. And Matthew and I have been talking about things for the last 10 years or so. And we've been engaging in these kinds of dialogues about what kind of spirituality is emerging in a new generation. And at some point we decided that we will do a book together. And it was at the time when Occupy Wall Street happened, We started working on a book in late August, and Occupy happened, September, so just a couple of weeks after that. And I had this experience, at Occupy. There was this one kid from Reciprocity, from our foundation, a kid that I've known for many years. He's been a client of every single homeless youth organization in New York City. He had an addiction problem and was just, one of those kids who was in a really bad place and nothing worked. And then one day after Occupy started, he showed up with a newspaper and he said, look, and there was this front page story and it had a picture of him getting arrested, and he was very proud of it, that he got arrested. And I said, so I mean, you had a nice situation going at a shelter. Why didn't you stay there? Why did you? I mean, you went back to the street to live in Zakoti Park. And he said, this is why. He said, in a shelter, I leave my bag, I go to the bathroom, I come back, my bag is gone. At Occupy, I leave my bag, I get arrested, I spent 24 hours in jail. When I'm ready to be released, there are people there waiting for me with food and water, making sure that I'm okay, people who want to celebrate my courage. And then he said, and then I go back to the camp and my bag is still there. And so this is the kind of a world that I want to work for, And so we realized that all the ideas that we've been talking about with Matthew in terms of these kinds of new qualities that were emerging in young people, new ways of relating to what really matters in their lives, new ways of, like building their lives around what they consider to be their sacred calling, we realized that all of those things were also happening in Zakoti Park. And so we kind of connected those two impulses and decided to write a book about this new spirituality. And one of the key components of that new spirituality is that, in the past, contemplation or meditation and activism were always kind of on two opposite spectrums, I mean, everyone thought that the ideal of a spiritual life is to sit on the mountain and let go of this world. What we realized is that for young people, spirituality that doesn't involve action was no spirituality at all. They wanted to act in the world, but not just act in the world in any kind of way. They wanted to act in the world in a way that reflects their deepest calling, their deepest values. They wanted to create a world like that kid at Occupy, that homeless kid, where everyone would be responsible for each other. And so that's kind of how this book, came about. Now, I kind of want to throw it back at you. So Chris, I mean, you mentioned this word service, that you love to serve, and that it's been an amazing experience because people have been writing you letters and their lives have been changed as a result of reading your book. I wanted to ask you a very personal question.
Oh.
What's, in your spiritual practice, in your life, what's the connection between, meditation and service?
Oh, that's a good question. There is no difference for me. A lot of people think we sit on our cushions and we meditate, and it's a formal sitting. But I think for those of us who've been sitting for a while, you realize your entire day can become your meditation. You're washing your hands and you're aware of the soap and the smell. It's a meditation. You're being there in the moment. So service is just an extension of that for me, for sure. It's just it's a heart calling that I believe you felt as well. We were talking a lot about the bhakti path of devotion and heart, and so service just is something that it's all I feel compelled to do in my life. Is to be there in whatever capacity. It doesn't always look the same. And I think a big service is that, the work you're doing with Matthew, and, I've been doing work with Ken Wilber now, and it's really actually very exciting for me to see these two generations coming together. Of course, you have both people in the younger and older generations that are very rigid in what they believe is spirituality, and it needs to look like, and it's right and it's wrong. But then you also have people in both camps that are very open and fluid about spirituality. And, it's been extremely just inspiring and moving for me, to see the work Adam does with Matthew, or to be doing work that I'm doing with Ken Wilber, or when we both wrote our books, to have people like Ram Dass and Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach and Lama Surya Das and all these elder spiritual teachers that cross the board in traditions from Hinduism to Buddhism, to Christianity, recognize the work and not only, write nice endorsements, but to support it on their websites and their social media pages, because they're recognizing, what they were doing when they were younger in the 60s and the 70s. It's just still emerging now. And that's an important service, is continuing that conversation, because a lot of younger people in their spirituality just want to do what they want to do. And that's fine. I mean, if that's what you feel compelled to do right now, do what you're going to do, and that's okay. But Adam and I have talked about this, and I think having that wisdom from the people that have walked the path before us, our elders, the people that have gone there and, have experienced the light, and now we're shining the light for our paths, to take that wisdom from them and learn, and then come together in a way where we can present that, to people of all ages. The funny thing for me is my publisher had our target demographic of my book, which was like 20 to 40, roughly. I can't tell you how many people have written to me in their 50s, 60s, 70s, that it just clicked for them. And that's amazing to me. That's so touching. It's just to know that the words, the spirit is there. The words are the semantics. It's the heart and the spirit and that connection, which I know comes through in your book as well. So I'd love to, actually, Adam, if you could talk a little bit about your experience of working maybe with Matthew or just elders in general, and bringing spirituality out in a way that it's accessible, not just for the younger generation, which I know a lot of our work is geared towards, but in a way that also honors the work of those who have come before us and that are a different generation.
Well, I think, Richard Rohr has this wonderful phrase where he says that we all need someone who can give us a dangerous permission to trust what's unfolding in our hearts, and then encourage us to build courage together to say yes to it and to live as an expression of that in the world. And for me, I feel that that's what it's been. People like Andrew Harvey or Matthew Fox. What's wonderful about collaborating with them is that I feel that they were able to show up in my life without having any agendas, and to really just be there as this kind of a listening and supportive presence. And whenever there was something that I struggled with, they would just relate their own experiences or the experiences that they had in their spiritual formation to whatever I was going through. And that would name my experience, but would also connect it to tools that, all of our wonderful traditions have, to essentially work through that experience and to essentially be empowered to move closer to really being able to become the person that I was born to be, so to speak, And so to me, that's really wonderful. I feel that it's very difficult to do that without having those elders in our lives. Now, as you mentioned, Chris, there are quite a few elders who are kind of looking for young people to work with, but they're not finding them. And I've had quite a few, well-known spiritual teachers saying, well, no one comes to my workshop. Well, okay. And then when we were working on a book, I think we interviewed quite a few young leaders from like 19 or 18 to like mid-30s. And more than 90% of them said that they're longing for mentors and they're not finding them. And then they said when we do find them, they talk too much. And so, and I think especially those two guys, Andrew Harvey and Matthew Fox, they really modeled to me this kind of a quality of what it means to show up as this kind of listening and supportive presence. So a person of a younger generation, instead of, just kind of feeling like there's a lot of pressure to subscribe to their framework and to even follow in their footsteps, instead, it's almost like there's this beautiful Quaker phrase, that says that to listen someone into life or into being is like the most vulnerable service that you can perform in life. And it's kind of like that, you know, their presence just kind of allowed me to touch something very sacred about, you know, that was trying to emerge, and gave me courage to say, you know, fuck it, I'm gonna do it. I'm really gonna do it. And that was life changing. And I think that this new spirituality, in terms of presenting it to people, I think it has to be presented in this kind of a dialogical way. And again, you know, I think that many people actually complained about Occupy because it was dialogical. And I think that there are some problems there for sure. But, you know, when you talk to some of those kids who participated in that initial movement, that's what they experienced. They experienced, you know, what it means to be part of a small community like this, where we can put our egos aside and relate to each other in such way that wisdom can come through everyone participate. And so it's almost like, you know, Martin Buber has this phrase that, you know, God becomes the between friends. And it's almost like that, you know, if we can relate to each other in that way, God just kind of emerges in the midst of whatever we're doing and begins to guide the process. And I think that spirituality needs to be presented that way, where we're not just talking about it, but we're creating experiences where God becomes the between friends. Or if you have difficulties with the word God, you know, replace it with something that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing to touch on. You know, a lot of people, as I said earlier, they're fixed, very fixed in their way, and they have it all figured out. And if your spirituality doesn't look like theirs or sound like theirs, then it's inauthentic or it's a lesser than, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. You know, I can only speak to my experience of spirituality and just life in general. I have no idea what's going on for any of you guys in your experience. So who am I to ever say that what you experience as truth is wrong? And who is any of you to say that what I experience as true is wrong? Ken Wilber has a saying, I don't remember verbatim, but he said something like, no one's smart enough to be wrong all of the time. You know, that's how it is. So, you know, you look at I think the core of the mystic traditions, Zen, mystic Christianity, you know, you look at these, and I believe at the core, they're all a very heart-centered teaching. You know, it comes back to one, to the heart. So there's always commonalities across the board. It doesn't mean that you can't have one faith and you know, honor that and ride that train all the way home. It just means that, you know, you have your open heart to others and your mind is open to others, and you honor the fact that their path might look different than you, and their path, it doesn't mean it's any less relevant. You know, it can be just as powerful as your own path. You know, and I think that that's a really inspiring thing too, to see these elder teachers like Matthew Fox and Ram Dass and you know, just the great people that are passing the torch right now. You know, that's what they've been teaching right along too, for the most part. Not all teachers, obviously, but I think if you read any of the teachers like Meister Eckhart or Thich Nhat Hanh, Ramana Maharshi, Krishnamurti, you know, it always comes back to, they're all, to me, saying a very, very similar thing, just wording it in their own experience. You know? So.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And I think that, you know, I mean, I look at some of my mentors. The reason why they're able to kind of work with the younger generation is because they had mentors
Right.
who were able to show up for them in that kind of a way.
Yeah.
And so I think that we're all, in a way, responsible to become those kinds of mentors to young people. And the truth is that it's never a one-way street.
Right.
You know, like when I work with homeless kids, it's not really clear who's helping him, because it literally feels like, you know, God does the work.
Right. Yeah.
And I know, I mean, I benefit just as much, if not more. And you know, I too need that healing that they do.
Right.
You know, my old mentor, the guy from India, used to say, you know, we're just as broken as the people that we serve. It's just that, you know, for some reason we're able to show up in that way.
Yeah.
But they are the people who bring us gifts, because through them we're discovering the truth of our humanity, of our purpose, and etc.
I'm quite sure when I go in and I speak at places like detox and rehabs, I'm getting much more out of it, I think, than anyone there. And that's not why I do it, but I really, like you just said, to be there and to open my heart in that way, and just it affords me an opportunity to go deeper into that experience, and hopefully I will touch and give hope to someone there. But and I think you touched on something as well. We talk about karma yoga and being of service, but doing it in a way where I'm not helping you. Like, look at me, I'm such a good guy, and I'm volunteering time, and I'm giving you a piece of bread or whatever. It's selfless, sincere selfless.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of. I mean, we have to be very careful because it's easy to kind of use that for the glorification of our own ego, and I think that's why, in a way, it's a safer way to just kind of assume that grace comes and does the work, and we need just as much help as the people that we're serving. Um, in terms of how are we doing time?
We got about 15 minutes,
15.
and then we'll do a 15 minute.
So you towards the end of your book, you have some stuff about spiritual practices, and we also have a chapter on spiritual practice. And in many ways, there's no spirituality without spiritual practice. What are the two of your favorite spiritual practices that are like lifelines for you?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, the basic is just meditation. Of course, I meditate diligently twice a day. I have to do that for me. I need a healthy routine in my life. I mean, sure, there are some days where I'll miss one, but if it's within my control, absolutely meditation. And there are so many different kinds of meditation, as many of us know. The trick is finding the one or ones that work for you. Because I know a lot of people that have tried, a certain kind, maybe Zen meditation, where they will just stare, eyes a third of the way open and or closed, and they'll stare at the wall, and they can't do it. And I get that, So there are some kinds of meditation that resonate for some people, some kind that don't, so that's a big thing. And I think meditation is key for unlocking, the strict identification we have with our bodies and our material selves, which are, of course, part of the equation, but it's a very small part. So meditation is one. And the other one is something I touch on in the book. I'm sharing it more in my second book than I did in the first, but it's a technique that I've heard Thich Nhat Hanh talk about in the past. I took it a little bit further with the way I do it, but a short version of it. It's really for dealing with our tough, difficult times. I know when a lot of people come to spirituality, they just want the love and light aspect. They want to feel good, and they believe that meditation is going to make us all blissed out, and sometimes it certainly does. But
that hasn't been my experience.
Okay, well,
yeah, being blissed out.
You are in good company then. But so there's this practice, where anytime I'm aware of negative thoughts or emotions coming up, if I'm able to, I will take a moment and close my eyes, and I will sit with this experience. And because our natural tendency as human beings is to avoid pain, that's what we want to do. But as we're doing that, we're keeping ourselves locked in this perpetual cycle just of more of the same, more pain, more disease. So it's not until we actually start facing it. So what I do is I'll close my eyes, and I will first tune in to allow my voice to say whatever it has to say. It can be as mean to me as it wants, or if it's judging, projecting, it can do that. I just allow it to do what it'll do. And then I also, after that, with our thoughts come subsequent emotions. So I tune into my body. I tune into what am I feeling? Sad, angry, anxious. I get very much in touch with that, and I allow it to be. I don't try to hide from it. And the third part of that is then I look to my physical sensations. Is there pain in my head? Is there tightening in my chest? Anywhere, any dis-ease I'm feeling in my body is applicable. So that's the first part of it. And then the second half is once I'm in a very intimate place with, the emotions, the thoughts, and the physical sensations. With my eyes closed, I mentally, but people can do it verbally, is I will say, first I actually imagine wrapping it up in a warm blanket, the same way a mother would her newborn baby. And I imagine myself holding it. And if this hasn't been the case for me, but some people I've talked to, it's been a little too personal to do that. So I tell them, well, just put it in a baby carriage, so it's not right there, and you can rock it back and forth. And once I'm doing that, I will mentally say to it that, I recognize that you're there, and I honor that you are there, and my heart is completely and unconditionally open to you right now, and I will be here with you for as long as you need me to be. And if there's anything you need me to know, please let me know. And the amazing thing is that usually within a minute, it all subsides. You know, that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it literally. We come to it with a very open heart. So we're completely churning around, you know, our natural tendency to avoid this pain. And I have experienced so much healing through that one practice. So when you said lifeline practice, like that's a lifeline practice, because part of what kept me sick in my addiction was that I was not willing to look at these difficult times. You know, we all have this stuff stored up in us. And a lot of it comes up in meditation, and that's fine. But then a lot of us also have the tendency to not, you know, just push it over here. And let's go back to the mantra and happy thoughts. And that has its place too. But so those are two for me. I would love to hear a couple of yours too.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, sure.
So for me, the two practices, the first one is actually a practice that comes from a Jewish tradition. I learned it from another mentor of mine, Rabbi Yehuda Fine. He was also kicked out of his congregation. I guess I'm attracted to people who, you know, he was, you know, he's a very holy man who now mainly lives in seclusion, but in the 60s when people were looking for gurus, he kind of went around and wasn't impressed with any. And he said, well, I'm Jewish, let me go to the Holy Land and find some Hasidic rabbis who survived the Holocaust. And he found a couple of really holy people and studied with them for a decade. And then he spent 30 years working on the streets of New York City, Los Angeles, and London, rescuing homeless kids from the streets. But he taught me this very simple Hasidic practice, you know, which is essentially, you imagine that God is your best friend. And you open every corner of your life, of your heart, to God, to your best friend. You name everything that's going on, and you just talk to God. And sometimes you cry, sometimes you scream, until there are no words to be said. And I found that practice to be extremely, extremely life-changing. You know, I mean, now I teach it to some of the homeless kids. It's amazing what happens, you know, because it's just like, and you know, some people believe that God can't enter certain corners of your heart, of your life, unless you open them and invite God in. And so it's kind of like that, you know. And this practice, I mean, comes from Reb Nachman, who is a Hasidic holy man. And to me, that's a practice that is just life-changing. And then I often follow that with a second practice, which is a practice of centering prayer, which is a practice that comes from Father Thomas Keating's lineage. And, you know, I originally learned centering prayer when I was 19, when I went to a Hindu monastery. And when I learned about centering prayer, I dismissed it because I thought, I'm here to learn some esoteric stuff. You know, this is way too simple. I bet it doesn't work. And then, like, you know, 15 years later, I went back to that practice and it changed my life. And it's a very simple practice. You know, most practices, most silent practices are concentrative practices where you try to focus on the mantra or on something. Centering prayer is not about concentration. It's about sitting in a state of receptivity and listening. It's about consenting to God's love and action in you. You know, and it's amazing. So I start with a conversational prayer that comes from Reb Nachman, and then it literally feels like the presence just kind of descends, you know. I mean, the friend becomes very real. And then once there are no more words to be said, I just kind of move into a centering prayer where I sit in the state of just kind of openness to this presence, and then say yes to it so it can do, you know, Father Thomas calls it the divine therapist who can do the work of healing, you know, on us. And so those two practices for me really changed my life. So those are my two favorites.
Nice. So we got a few minutes. Was there anything you wanted to say?
I think maybe it would be cool to just have a dialogue.
Cool. So, all right. So that gives us 5 additional minutes. And if anyone, we would love any questions, or if you don't have questions, whenever I do a Q&A, I always encourage people that if anything came up for you that you would like to share just in general that you think would be of benefit to the group, please feel free. You know, Adam and I are sitting up here talking, but doesn't mean everyone in the circle is not a teacher. So I would love to hear from anyone that has either a question or a comment.
I have a question as to, you guys were touching about on a lot of, kind of differentiating the elderly spirituality and this kind of youth attitude towards spirituality, or this new spirituality that's coming from the youth. And my question was just, for you guys, as what do you guys think is the biggest divide, or the thing that are keeping, both these sort of spiritualities, although they are in the same vein, what's keeping them separate, and what's keeping them not matching up, or non-linear exactly?
So, I wanted to share quickly a personal experience. I was recently, a few months ago, in a gathering of mainly monks, elder monks. And me and a couple of other people, kind of our age, started talking about this kind of new impulse that young people are feeling. And all the monks got freaked out. I mean, they were just like freaked out. They were just like, this is, they didn't say this is bullshit, but they kind of, taught it, I think. And it was like a 7-day long gathering. And after that first day, first session, I thought, it felt like I just got beat up. I was just like, wow. 7 more days. This is going to be intense, But it's interesting because, by the 3rd day, we were all becoming friends. And then by the 6th day, we were like taking notes and inviting each other to come to our centers and to speak and to and so I think that the main reason why, the divide happens is that those two groups never meet. Really, in a way where each of them can, kind of take off their mask and just be who they are. In a situation where, we can really have this experience of shared hearts, And so as a result, there are a lot of assumptions, and, the language is different. And again, an interesting experience from Occupy. So there's a meditation group of young people, and then right next to them there's a Occupy Faith, which is religious leaders, basically elders. They've never had a conversation, and I think that just shows. And what's beautiful about this group is that it's an intergenerational group, and I think we have to start from a conversation, because it's only when we get to know each other, when we begin to trust each other, that we can actually begin to trust what's trying to be born in our hearts. So that's.
I think Adam nailed the most important aspect of that answer. It's something that came up for me also is obviously spirituality is a very personal thing,
right.
For those that practice it. And we have these experiences through meditation or whatever other practices we do that become quite literally the realist experiences of our lives. And when we have that experience, I think people go one of two ways with it. It's either, they have these satori moments or just moments of light and whether it's nature, mysticism, or whatever it may be, they have this experience and, it's a result of whatever path they might be on in their practice. And it's like, holy shit, this is it. I get it now. And so with that realization, either they go one way with it, which is, I had this realization because of this path. I know that this is the way. The other side of that coin is people will have this experience and it will be such an opening experience that they will realize, holy shit, the path is the way. Not this path, the path. It's all the way. You go beyond. What's the gate, paragate, parasamgati, bodhiswaha, which is a beautiful mantra of gone beyond the great beyond. And when you go beyond that great beyond, where it's the judgments are gone, the opinions are gone. It's literally just this experience of Dharmakaya or Brahman or Godhead or whatever you want to call it. It's just like, here it is. So that's what came up for me.
And the results, I think we're like experiencing an evolutionary shift. In the past, most people came to their sense of spirituality through one specific path.
Right.
We're moving beyond religion, especially in this country, And so the first, elders don't necessarily understand it. And so they say, well, why dig many different holes? You will never go deep. And, one of my friends who's an Episcopalian priest, then a Sufi dervish, said, no, we're not digging different holes. We're just using different tools to dig one hole.
Yeah.
And so that's also, I think, different,
Yeah, I think that's huge. Thanks. Well, yes.
So I'm not exactly sure, but basically my question is how this something that I face a lot with talking to people, particularly in my age range, I'm 20, is how to engage people in the conversation, the dialogue on spirituality who are already completely jaded against the church and just completely think that anything related to God or a higher power is just like not what they want. Like, how do you engage in those kinds
You
of
don't.
No?
You don't, right?
You're not. It's like, you have your truth, they have their truth. Like if they're interested in it, at some point they'll come around, and if not, that's cool. They're living their life. The tricky thing I know is once you're on that spiritual path and you start to gain that experience of liberation and freedom, you start to realize that you're more than these material bodies. There's such an amazing sense of just profound liberation. And, I know a lot of us, when we're experiencing reverse time, we want to shout it from the rooftops. We want to drag all our friends into meditation groups or the yoga studios. And I understand, because we want them to experience that too. We love them and we care about them. But you can't force it. It's like people in recovery, they could be killing themselves and you want nothing more for them than to get that help. But you can't force it on them. You can. I guess you can, have that intervention and get them into a treatment center. But once they leave that treatment center, it's still on them. That person needs to want to do it. So I understand what you're saying, but if it's you're doing your dharma, they're doing their dharma, and it just might not intersect at this time. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? But that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. We deal with that at our Center for Homeless Youth, and I decided a long time ago that I'm not gonna preach spirituality to the kids who come there. But I also decided that I'm gonna ask them deep questions. So, like, one of my favorite questions when they come is, "What breaks your heart? What makes you truly alive?" And it's interesting because then, we can get into, they can start talking about, like Chris just told me about this experience that he had, running and listening to some pretty hardcore music, right?
Very heavy, yeah.
And so it's like, and all of us have had those experiences. And so it's interesting because, like when you ask those questions, people actually start talking about those experiences. And then sometimes they say, by the way, that thing, that God that they're talking about, that's what they're talking about. The experience you're just telling me about. And that sometimes shifts the conversation from religion to what is meaningful, in our lives. And I think that the truth is that most people are searching for meaning, whether they know it or not. Even like when we talk about addiction, we're searching for something that feels like we're complete, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the hole, in the heart that I was trying to fill with. For me, it was chemical substances. For some others, it might be sex or food or shopping. But yeah, we're filling it, and there's something deeper that we're looking for, and it's just not doing it. I think we have time for like one more question before we wrap this up. Well, two, but we can do one more if there is one more.
Can I ask a question for the elders?
Please.
So, thank you so much for the conversation. It's amazing. And one thing you touched on that I just want to get a little clarity is when you were saying the younger folks, they pretty much don't want to listen to the talking heads.
Yeah.
They want a different experience. Could you just tell me a little bit more about like what does the other experience look like?
Well, the other experience would be like, invite some young people to your home, serve like tea or coffee or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And let's like together come up with the questions that we're going to reflect on.
So it's more interactive.
Yeah,
with,
it's more interactive, and no one is assuming, a role of a leader, so to speak. And there are specific tools also. I think Parker Palmer, developed some wonderful tools for how to gather in groups, you know, but also Pir Zia Inayat Khan, who's a Sufi leader in his 40s, he's fairly young, and they developed a methodology they call heartful conversation. Sometimes it's good to use those tools, but it's essentially, I mean, the main thing is that we're in a dialogue, you know. Let's give each other a benefit of the doubt and assume that we all know something.
I don't think it's just today's generation. I think even the younger generation, a generation ago, when you're younger, you want to be heard. You know, it's part of who you are. So to have that, like you said, dialogue. When I do longer workshops myself, I do multiple Q&As, or you know, I ask questions because I want to engage people. Again, because I want to hear what they have to say, because I always learn from what people have to say. But also, let's open it up and let's come together and make this a collective experience. You know, instead of just, I'm going to talk to you for 1, 2, 3 hours and you're going to listen because I have it all figured out, or, you know,
and I'm going to make you feel like shit, you know, like, and that's traditionally, I mean, our religious systems have done that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, you had that experience, forget about it, just do this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I find that even though in education, outside of religious education,
Oh yeah, I mean,
schools do not
it's
promote
pretty screwed up.
dialogue, and so much could happen in that classroom setting with just letting kids talk and hearing where they're at. And
you know, I was once at an amazing retreat about this heartful conversation that Pir Zia Inayat Khan. Now we're running out of time, but they did something radical. It was a retreat that lasted 5 days, and what they did, there were, I think, 2 or 3 sessions. So the first day was planned, and then, and I mean, we didn't know it, then they divided people into small groups and said every group is responsible for 1 session for the rest of, you know, 4 days. So everyone became, and it was one of the most amazing retreats I've ever been to. It's like, you know.
So we're going to wrap up, but if anyone had a question they didn't get to ask or wanted to mention or say something to Adam or I, we'll be around for a little while. Adam only has 2 copies of his book left, which is wonderful. I have more, so if you are only going to buy 1 book, I recommend buy Adam.
Buy Chris's book.
No, buy Adam. But anyways,
and I have, you know, free DVDs.
Oh,
Free DVDs.
Tell them really quick about that.
It's a film called Invisible Diaries of New York's Homeless Youth. It's a film made for TV for Channel 11. I don't know if Channel 11 happens here. PIX. Maybe, I don't know. But, you know, they did a film about themselves and it was nominated for an Emmy, and it's the kids from our foundations.
Wow.
And it's their stories.
And you can find out about Adam at adambucko.com, BUCKO, and also reciprocityfoundation.org. What he's doing in New York is tremendous work with the homeless. So thank you so much, Adam, for coming out today.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.